Hello there. This is an interesting development in Ukraine, with the US pulling out all funding. Just a pause on all military aid, everything, due to Zelensky, in Trump's opinion, not putting in efforts to make a peace deal. Which means, assuming of course that you do not buy into the narrative that Ukraine is fighting for democracy and Trump, being evil and a dictator, wants to aid his brother dictator Putin against the democracy of Ukraine. That's basically the narrative if you are a Democrat or listen to the mainstream media. Otherwise, well, you think Trump wants what's best for the US and he cares for them more than he cares for Ukraine, so he does what's best for the US, which is to try and stop the war, because it costs them a lot. There's also the point he made about people being gone from both sides, Russians and Ukrainians, who are just normal people who don't particularly have any, let's say, stake in Putin getting more power or whatever it is that the left thinks the war is about. And therefore, they are victims. It's a shame. We hope that less people end violently in such ways. So for that, we need to end the war as quickly as possible. And basically, Trump believes he can do it. He can parley with Putin, make a deal, and end this. So assuming, of course, that you believe in the possibility of peace, I suppose, then Trump pulling all resources from Ukraine makes some sense. Basically telling them you are being selfish, petulant, not even that, right? It's not even telling Ukraine, telling Zelensky that he's being selfish, petulant, and rude. And that basically it's time to close this saga. You've fought for so long, we gave you so much money and resources. There's no victory against Russia so far, and things are not looking bright. So let's just sit down and settle it with talks. Well, President Trump is ordering a pause on shipments of US military aid to Ukraine after his heated Oval Office argument with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last week, White House official told CNN Monday. This is a CNN article, of course. So the halt in aid, which came after Trump held a series of meetings with top national security officials at the White House, could have dire effects on Ukraine's war-fighting abilities, officials and analysts said. It will remain in place until Trump determines Zelensky has made a commitment to seeking peace talks, one official said, essentially forcing Ukraine to a negotiating table by threatening further losses on the battlefield. The president has been clear that he is focused on peace. We need our partners to be committed to that goal as well. We are pausing and reviewing our aid to ensure that it is contributing to a solution, the White House official said. In short, if you will not agree to a negotiation, then just do it yourself. We'll stop helping you. Now, there is a movement in Europe to try and basically create an alternative to the US peace plan. And that's the Coalition of the Willing, an idea being led by the UK and France, two of the most powerful militaries in Europe that are still very, very tiny in comparison to the US, Russian, or Chinese militaries, incidentally. The question remains over who could be involved. What about Germany, Poland, and Italy? So the reason there's a coalition of the willing is that in order for the European Union to take action as one, basically they need no countries to veto it. And guess what? There's some Eastern European countries who, despite not liking Putin and feeling threatened by him, don't particularly want to go to war with him either if it can be avoided, and are skeptical of the EU grabbing more power in the process. So what they came up with instead is a coalition of the willing. Basically, the countries that agree voluntarily without being forced by EU decision will just do what they are willing to do to support Ukraine. Coalition of the Willing could provide boots on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Of course, they're now also talking about maybe not just a ceasefire, because essentially Ukraine, without the funding it receives, without the ammunition, money, and so on, isn't going to last very long. And a hefty sum came from the US, more than any other single country by far, more than the EU as an institution gave. I believe if you put together all the European nations and the EU budget, together they might eclipse the contribution from the US. but it's still a huge haul. So, led by France and the UK, the initiative could see troops from a number of European and NATO countries deployed to Ukraine as peacekeepers in order to deter Vladimir Putin from rearming and attacking again in the future. I wonder for how long and how much it's going to cost. I mean, the situation financially in Europe isn't great. The economy is not doing well. There's lots of inflation, wage stagnation. There's a very strong burden on the people due to so much migration. You have to house these people, give them services. Most of them are on social security and such. Most of them don't work, statistically speaking. So I'm talking, of course, about the migrants from the third world. Migrants from other European countries usually do quite well, and they're not a burden on average. So, Keir Starmer said Europe must do the heavy lifting on defense and indicated several countries had expressed interest in being part of the coalition. Of course, Keir Starmer is also pretty much on board, it seems, with the idea of having an army of the European Union and basically decoupling themselves from the protection of the US, which is what NATO is all about, because essentially they are no longer one voice in terms of where military power should be used, which is a huge schism in the Western Alliance. Now, a coalition of the willing is, according to this article, going to be led by UK, France, and Ukraine on a peace deal that could be presented to the US. The countries committed to working together on this deal would form a coalition of the willing. Countries in the coalition could end up sending soldiers to act as peacekeepers in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Military analyst Michael Clark said it has to be a coalition of the willing because we have at least 2 NATO members, Slovakia and Hungary, who are vetoing anything that Putin would not like. It's the same with the EU. So basically they can't force it. They have to create a coalition of the willing. This approach would allow NATO members to act in a group, but not under the NATO umbrella, avoiding vetoes from member states who don't approve or don't wish to be involved. Serkier's choice of the term, coalition of the willing, is also interesting. It's perhaps intended to remind an American audience of a previous use of the same phrase when the UK, Poland, and other countries joined the US invasion of Iraq, which was awful, incidentally. It was a mistake. They found none of the biological or nuclear weapons that they claimed there were there, and they destroyed the country. They basically created the fertile grounds for the takeover of the terror organizations, let's say, of the entire place, basically, and create a lot of problems. Lots of people are gone, and they earn nothing. They did earn something. Lots and lots of money for oil firms in the US and the politicians that were invested in them, or later on received leading roles in the same corporations with a very high salary and a golden parachute. So something was gained, but the people of Iraq, as well as the people of the US and the rest of the coalition there, seem to have just lost. Strange that. Russia has so far rejected the idea of any NATO or European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Now who's in? Keir is being quite coy about who the willing are, Professor Clark said. The initiative is being led by the UK and France, so it seems a safe bet that both countries would be involved. Both have powerful militaries, and the 2 nations are also the only countries in Europe with nuclear weapons. The important thing is that Britain and France are going to lead it because they're the 2 most important military powers in Europe. It is notable that France's President Emmanuel Macron originally raised the possibility of French troops in Ukraine last year when he refused to rule it out. I'm going to stop there and say, isn't it strange that both are struggling politically? I mean, Keir Starmer has abysmally low approval ratings, and in fact he has a majority in parliament that relies on about 20% of the vote share, basically because the Conservatives were the Tories were so bad that basically the voters just stayed at home. The Labour actually did worse than the last elections, where they lost historically, but somehow came out with a 60% or so majority. The people are that disillusioned. Do you think they're going to line up to go fight Russia in Ukraine? Somehow I doubt it. And incidentally, people are saying that it's, how to put it, somehow racist to claim that migrants are not willing to line up to do so instead. There's lots and lots and lots of military-aged men from third world countries coming into the country of the UK or France. How about conscripting or recruiting them? Well, guess what? There's been so many interviews, and I haven't seen statistics, but I assume that it's quite reliable. It's the same thing that happened in Ukraine, where basically, if you ask people who are, let's say, African or Middle Eastern, whether they are willing to fight for Ukraine, they're saying no, of course not. It's not my country. Basically, if this becomes a mandatory or forced, then they'll just go back home. So who's going to fight? I'm not sure. The same thing, incidentally, going to be in Germany, where basically about 50% of the people voted for the right. They are the two biggest parties. They won the election, but the CDU basically backstabbed the AfD. They backstabbed the right-wing voters. They claimed before the election that they are going to reduce migration and have a tighter control of it. Then after the election, they said they have no interest whatsoever in doing so and went to form a coalition with the left. So I doubt that they have that much support either. I can't say that I believe that the Germans are going to go fight Russians for Ukraine either. It's going to be very interesting to see. Recruitment in all of these countries, as well as the US until Trump came in, is down by a lot. And they're struggling to meet their goals in that sense. So I'm not sure anyone is willing to go and risk being ended for what essentially comes down to a economic zone with no culture and a evil racist history, which is how left-wing parties frame Western countries. They deny that there's any sort of national identity based on ethnicity, and of course they deny that there's culture. And they deny that there's a positive history. They only acknowledge a negative history for these places. So as a result, people feel very much that they have no incentive, nothing to fight for. Also, they often engage in politics that disadvantage the sort of working class and lower middle class people of their own country, the natives. So as a result, again, people don't particularly feel that they want to fight for these governments, and this is my take on why recruitment is way down, which is a fact. Now, we can also look at the coalition of the willing in Iraq on Wikipedia, where basically it says that on November 2002, the US President George W. Bush, visiting Europe for a NATO summit, declared that should Iraqi President Saddam Hussein choose not to disarm, the United States will lead a coalition of the willing to disarm him. The Bush administration briefly used coalition of the willing to refer to the countries who supported, militarily or politically, the 2003 invasion of Iraq and subsequent military presence in post-invasion Iraq. The list released by the White House in March 2003 included 46 members. In April, the list was updated to include 49 countries, but was reduced to 48 after Costa Rica objected to its inclusion. Of the 48 countries on the list, 4 contributed troops to the invasion force: the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Poland. An additional 37 countries provided some number of troops to support military operations after the invasion was complete. So they had a much wider coalition back then than they do now, it seems. There's also the more important, interesting part: who's against it. This is a Euronews article. Basically, it lists hesitant countries, skeptics, and the people who are totally unwilling. I'd like to go over those. So hesitant countries are Portugal, for example, assured full support for the plan that will be defined by the UK and France, but Lisbon considers it still too early to consider sending troops to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping operation. The sending of national forces must have the backing of the National Defense Superior Council, which will convene on the 17th of March, said President of the Republic Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. The Dutch Prime Minister, Dick Schoof, said that he has not made any concrete commitments on behalf of his country, but he gave assurances that the Netherlands will join French and British military planners in drafting possible solutions. Spain could also be on board on a later stage. Ireland's government spokesperson said there's been a willingness to discuss the topic and Dublin will consider it, while stating that it's not the right moment to do so. Italy and Poland are skeptics. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is among the most skeptical leaders. Quote, "I am still perplexed about the use of European troops. I see this as a solution that risks proving very complicated and probably less decisive than others," she told journalists after the London meeting, underlining that deployment of Italian troops has never been on the table at this stage. In her view, the best option to offer security guarantees to Ukraine is to involve NATO's Article 5 on collective defense in some way, which commits the alliance's members to protect each other in the event of an attack. So presumably she says if Russia breaks the terms that will be agreed on, then maybe we will use the Article 5 from the NATO alliance to basically guarantee a joint response, a joint punishment for breaking said terms. Despite being among the strongest supporters of Ukraine since the invasion, Poland remains very firmly opposed to sending any troops to Ukraine. Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that the country has already taken a heavy burden by accepting almost 2 million refugees from Ukraine in the first weeks of the war. Warsaw will provide support in terms of logistics and political support, but no boots on the ground, it seems. I mean, they are also in range of invasion of Russia, I suppose, in case Russia takes umbrage to their soldiers being involved. Now, the totally unwilling are Hungary and Slovakia, where they are the most critical countries on the EU military support to Ukraine and most in favor of opening dialogue with Russia to end the war. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban accused European leaders gathered in London of wanting to go on with the war instead of opting for peace. The Slovakian Prime Minister expressed reservation about the strategy of peace through strength, which he considers a justification for continuing the war in Ukraine. I wonder about that. Peace through strength. What exactly are you trying to get from the Russians through strength, apart from a unilateral surrender? Because basically Putin just says, I want you to not put NATO missiles in Ukraine, and that was basically his demand for not going to war in the first place. Now after the war, he has conquered some parts of Ukraine, and he says, I want to keep some of what I managed to conquer, and I'll give some back, and that's the compromise in the peace agreement. I kind of wonder at what point the peace through strength strategy actually brings peace. So it says here, it's therefore unlikely that the Hungarian and Slovak governments would participate in any initiative with the notion of sending their troops out of the question. Now, where does Germany stand? That's the important part. Current German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has ruled out sending German troops to Ukraine, although his defense minister Boris Pistorius hinted that peacekeeping forces could be stationed in a demilitarized zone in the event of a ceasefire. This position could change, however, if the decision to deploy German soldiers in Ukraine may prove difficult to sell to domestic public opinion. The German parliament needs to approve any foreign deployment of the national army, known as the Bundeswehr? I have no idea how to speak German. Beforehand, to determine details, what the role of the troops would be, which other countries would be involved, Scholz spokesperson Stefan Hebestreit, something like that, explained during a press conference. So, in short, the new government might have a different opinion on whether to send the troops in or not. Now, it says here that it'll take some time anyway, because Germany is in the process of forming a new coalition government, so voting on such a topic is unlikely to take place soon, and it seems too early for such decisions. Security experts at the European Council on Foreign Relations told Euronews that discussions about European military deployments to Ukraine are at a very early stage. The London meeting being clarified that Europeans would also seek US backing for any such plan, and a ceasefire agreement between Russia and Ukraine before committing troops. Now, this might change if the US just keeps saying we will not fund the Ukrainian war machine, because if that actually happens, then the war either stops or Russia wins. I think that's kind of how it goes. Presumably, Putin won't just take advantage of this because he doesn't want to gain the hostility of the US. If Putin goes full steam ahead and trounces Ukraine and starts taking over large swaths, then Trump's idea that this move is going to lead to peace is going to look very stupid. And at that point, he would basically be almost forced to go full steam ahead with fighting Russia, which is exactly what Ukraine and Europe seems to want, at which point there'd be a much stronger coalition against him and Putin will suffer. So my prediction is Putin doesn't go full steam ahead just because the US pulled forces. They will have a sort of steady push, putting pressure slowly on Ukraine in order to get them to just give up trying to win the conflict and come to the negotiating table. basically a negotiation that favors Putin because he shows, how to put it, being open to what Trump wants to see, which is a peace agreement in Ukraine. He said that even before the elections. That basically that plays into his hands. It might have been kind of stupid to go against the US in this manner that Zelensky did, unless of course his backing from Europe is willing to fill the void almost instantly and push him into an even footing or better with Russia. We'll see how this goes. I'm honestly not sure that European countries are actually going to back him to this extent. Even if they try, they might fail. Once again, they don't really have the backing of their own populace in this, and I don't think that the average European soldier, military-aged male, is very keen on dying for Ukraine. The idea that Russia is threatening to invade the rest of Europe after Ukraine doesn't seem to have gained purchase in the minds of most of the public, especially the right-leaning public, which usually is more likely to actually be in the military and especially in a frontlines role. So I don't see it, honestly. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.